I'm so happy to be here today to talk about cognitive rest. Is it really best for the treatment of concussion? Well, some would argue it's not. I'm going to argue yes, it is the best treatment that we currently have. There's some research behind it. It is intuitively simple and reasonable. Think about it, rest to allow you to heal. However, there is so much pushback and resistance to it in our culture that my mind is boggled by it. And I think about, why is that? Why is that? And, you know, when I was a kid, Sunday was actually a day of rest, no longer. In our culture, what do we have? Workaholics? Has anyone ever been called a restaholic? No. In fact, if you were, that would probably be very pejorative and you'd be considered lazy. Do we know how to rest? Do we teach our children to rest? Do we practice rest? Do we model it for our youth? Absolutely not. And this is a problem because I think this also contributes to the frequency of concussion that we have seen skyrocket in the last 10 years. Now, I'm a neuropsychologist. Some people don't know what that is. A neuropsychologist is a doctoral level licensed healthcare professional who studies brain-behavior relationships. That means relating the structure of the brain to how the human organism functions. So, for example, my occipital lobes back here help me visually process what's going on out here. And my frontal lobes help with my executive functioning, my planning and organization of the talk, censorship, which I hope will work because I'll really be relying on my frontal lobes today. I'm also a mother. And a mother is, from what I've heard, someone who does the work of 100 people but doesn't get a paycheck for it. As a mother and as a neuropsychologist, that can often be very conflicting because on the one hand, you can really appreciate the 100 billion neurons, nerve cells in our brain and that delicate structure and what it's in charge of everything that our body does. However, on the other hand, you have to tolerate injury. I mean, you have to try to protect your child, but you have to be used to it. And that was always a struggle for me. My children are now grown, but I will tell you, I was a terrible ice hockey mom. Terrible. I would have PVCs, heart failure. I'd watch who would go down on the ice, and as soon as that person went down, look, oh, it's not my kid, thank you. And then feel such guilt because it was somebody's kid. It was somebody's kid. At the time, this was back in the 1990s, the National Hockey League was one of the first groups, professional athletic organizations, to implement a concussion program, a concussion treatment management program. And they also did the baseline testing, which you're all familiar with now, which were developed by neuropsychologists. And I thought, well, gee, if they have that kind of a program for professional athletes, aren't our kids' brains just as or more important? So I decided to implement a baseline program, testing program, in the state of New Jersey back in the 1990s. And as you know, with baseline testing, it looks at some neurocognitive skills that are really related to concussion. In other words, you don't forget to do math or don't know how to read if you have a concussion, but your reaction time, verbal memory, visual memory, processing speed, attention, and concentration can be affected by concussion. And we collected data at the time on over 200 very healthy high school athletes. And what did we find? We found that those who had sustained 2 or more concussions in their history, now these are bright kids, healthy kids, very bright, but those who had sustained 2 or more were statistically different in terms of their grade point average, attention and concentration, symptoms such as emotional, physical, cognitive, etc. So in a sense, there were here now subtle enduring effects that we could see in kids. Also at the time, there was no protocol for how to treat concussion. I don't know if there is one really right now either, for that matter, but there was no real protocol that everyone agreed upon. So pediatricians, physicians would decide what to do if a child had a concussion. Giza and Ph.D, two major neuroscientists and researchers whom I'm sure you've heard of, had done the seminal work, pivotal, landmark research in animals that showed that there was about a 7 to 10 day window of recovery of this neurochemical cascade that occurs in our brain after a concussion. So we thought, many of us, including myself, well, gee, maybe we should think about a 7 to 10 day recovery period, a rest period. Let's apply that. And then there was more research that came out with rats that showed that those who'd been given a concussion, if they exerted themselves, tended to take longer to recover. So we had some what we call translational research, translating what goes on with animal research to how that might apply to humans. So I recall speaking about concussion and a protocol to treat concussion at a medical grand rounds at a significant major hospital, and a neurologist got up and said, I don't believe in any of this. You know, I'll see them the next morning, they're fine to go to school and start playing again. I send them right back. And I said, well, how can you do that in the face of this research? He said, well, that's on animals, it's not on humans. We don't have human research. To which I responded, okay, let me go out and get 100 kids and give them all concussions and take half of them and make them go play football, ice hockey, have a great time, and the others you can rest. Well, obviously that's unethical. You can't do that. It's very difficult in this whole concussion area to get good, controlled experimental studies, because you can't fool around like that. And now, of course, we know that rest, according to the international conferences on concussion, rest is the signature, the hallmark, the cornerstone of concussion treatment and recovery. We started seeing a lot of concussions, kids coming with concussions and not doing well in school and needing accommodations. And I was wondering, why so many concussions at this time? Well, part of it was the media. Part of it is that, girls play a lot more sports now than they used to. Kids they start early, they play year-round, they go from one sport to the next, to the next, to the next. So you increase the athletic exposures. When you increase the number of athletic exposures, you're going to increase the probability of concussion. Then I had a case where I had a female athlete, a ninth grader at the time, who had been an honor student, very successful, who'd had apparently a concussion during a sport. I don't want to go into details to protect the patient. And it had been 12 months where she was not able to recover. She had been taken to a lot of different hospitals, and finally the mother brought her to see me and said, what can we do here? Well, it turned out she'd not only had one concussion, she'd had a few concussions because, as many of you may know, your brain is the major engineer of everything your body does. So one thing it also affects is what's called your proprioception, or where you see yourself in response to the world, signals out there. So you tend to bang into things, you tend to be a little more clumsy, and your reaction time is low. So she'd never been told to rest, and she'd suffered quite a few concussions, but the major one had occurred 12 months before. And they came to me and said, what can we do? Because here's this girl now who's struggling in school, had never been a behavioral problem. It was actually had gotten into a behavioral problem at school also. She had emotional difficulties, and she was now in psychiatric treatment and taking medication for it. And the mother said, I just want my daughter back. Well, what could I do? I said, you know what? What we have is rest. I want you to go on 1 full week of very comprehensive rest. How do we define that? No computers, no video, no texting, no Facebook, no cell phone, no friends coming over the house, no you going out of the house, not even to go shopping, no school, no homework, no reading. If you have TV on, it's something that's not very stressful, and you're lying down, kind of just listening to it, but really cutting down the work of the brain. Because you can put your arm in a cast if you break it and not use it, but you can't do that with your brain because it has to work 24 hours a day. The most you can do is reduce the amount of work. Okay. Well, at that point, I had the most demonstrative explosion in my office, literally screaming and running down the hallway, disturbing everyone, because there was no way this young girl was going to do that. Just no way, no way. You know, that kind of rest can be social suicide for an adolescent. Now, of course, the school said, you know, we don't think it's really concussion. She's a female, hormones, puberty. I mean, don't you know those 3 factors are the cause of everything that goes on that's wrong in the world? I didn't quite believe that. And Dad called me the next day and said, are you sure you know what you're doing? Is this the right thing? And I said, look, I have nothing else to give you. Let's try it. What is there to lose? They did it for 1 full week, comprehensive rest. They came back. Her scores improved dramatically on testing, and she really did feel a lot better. Put her on another full week of comprehensive rest. She improved. She continued to improve. It was unbelievable. Now, many people say that's a placebo effect. You know, you're really good, Dr. Moser. You're like a magician. You talk to people and you make them feel better. Possibly. Possibly. That's a possibility. So we did another research study and said, you know, it looks like this rest thing helps not only right after a concussion, but it can maybe even help later on, a long time after, if somebody hasn't really done that. And we took our cases, had them independently evaluated, and what we found was that we looked at kids who had a concussion and then rested within 8 days, 8 to 10 days, and we looked at those who got their rest between, up to a month after, and those who got their rest period after a month. And what we found was that they all improved, and there was no significant difference among the groups. In other words, the group that was way out there still improved just as much as the group that applied the rest early. Of course, there are many flaws to the study because it didn't have a control, but it said something to us. Then I had another case where the young boy had a concussion, very headachy, had just had his concussion, and I said, you need to stay home from school. But it was the beginning of the school year, and so the father, who was an orthopedic surgeon, called me and said, I'm not letting my kid stay home. I'm not letting my kid stay home from school, even if he is symptomatic and has a headache, because he can't miss anything. And he said, where is your evidence? Where is your evidence, scientific evidence? Now, again, we don't have a control. We can't concuss kids and then tell them not, to either exert themselves or not exert themselves. But we came up with another idea. And what we did was our second study, or actually our third at that point, and what we looked at was, if we could find students who'd been tested right after their concussion, were told to rest, but did not rest, because some are non-compliant, and then they came to our center, and then we tested them again, and we could see if there was any difference. Because if there's a difference, that's spontaneous recovery. And then we applied rest, and then we tested them again. Now, you would think with spontaneous recovery, they should get better. But what we found, and it's going to be published hopefully this year, it's been accepted for publication, is that indeed, in many cases, significantly, it makes a difference even if you apply it later on. So in a sense, these individuals served as their own controls. They served as their, and many were at different, some came in right after their concussion, some came in a lot, a ways out. But what we see is that when they didn't rest for a period, they really didn't improve very much, but when we applied the rest later on, they did. So here's a little bit more research that we have now. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about, I've told you what I believe taking comprehensive rest is and what kinds of things you can do, or what we suggest. We give our students a list of things to do, such as meditate, sleep, lie on the couch with TV on, listen to audiobooks, have your grandmother or someone talk to you about what happened in the old days, because you never have those moments. You never have that time to do those kinds of things. If you have a dog or a pet, brush it, take care of it, don't fool around. You don't want to fall and hit your head again, but go outside, listen to nature, have lunch on the patio, all those things that you never get to do. In other words, be unplugged. Now, some people say this is ridiculous, but I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, we didn't have computers. We didn't have video games. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have texting. We didn't go out very much because there was probably only one car in the family, and Dad took that to work, so you stayed home. On TV, it was all black and white, and maybe just 3 channels, and most of the stuff was boring. And it certainly ended at midnight when the flag came on and the national anthem. So we lived differently. We didn't exert our brains as much. And I think that's what we need to return to as a culture, to think of how rest really is important. Because it's my thought that the kids who come to my office are the ones who've suffered many subconcussive blows or other unidentified concussions. But this is the one that they come for because they never really had the time to recover or rest in between. This is our protocol. In order for an athlete to return to play, number 1, they have to feel fine. And by fine, I don't mean just saying, how are you feeling? Oh, I feel good, I feel fine. Because if it's an athlete, they'll tell you they're feeling good, unless they're really, really feeling bad. But basically, they'll tell you they're feeling fine. So I will say, okay, great. Now, remember the way you felt before the concussion, and think about the way you feel now. If you were 100% then, currently, are you 50%? Are you 95%? Are you 20%? Are you 99.5%? And very often athletes who are almost there will say, well, I'm 98, 99, which is great because then you know that they're almost there, but they're not fully recovered. So the athlete has to feel 100%, 100%. 2, their neurocognitive test scores need to be at baseline or better, or if there aren't any, you have followed them so that their test scores no longer improve and they've plateaued and stabilized. Number 3, they have to be asymptomatic with regular school for youth. In other words, you can't feel fine and still have academic accommodations. And by the academic accommodations, when you have a concussion, those can be things such as extended time, no tests, no quizzes, note-taking for you. I mean, there are a whole bunch of different accommodations that can happen. But basically, you have to feel 100% with all cognitive activity as well. And then, of course, the most very important piece, and that is physical exertional testing by preferably an athletic trainer or someone who is trained in sports concussion management to be sure that none of the symptoms return with physical exertion. Now, because of the more recent studies in youth in terms of cerebral blood flow and also looking at the microstructures of the brain, we're finding that, at least we're believing that many of these structures and cerebral blood flow do not necessarily fully recover within the first month for many, and some go out further. So what we do is we keep them out of contact play or sports for about 3 weeks, no symptoms. 3 weeks, feeling great, no symptoms. Because I see too many kids return with another concussion once they've been cleared. Now, this does not mean I don't believe in exercise, because people say, oh, this is the rest lady, she doesn't believe in exercise, you know. First of all, I don't believe in cocoon therapy, if that's what it is. In other words, do not wrap duct tape around your students' eyes and stick them in a closet in the dark for a week. That's stupid. I would have I'd feel like I'd have a concussion. I would not feel comfortable. That's stimulus deprivation. Be reasonable. I mean, yes, if someone is having light sensitivity, you might want to darken things. But don't go to that extreme. And if the concussion symptoms linger after you've tried your significant rest period, then do introduce exercise with the help of an athletic trainer, some sort of modified exercise that really doesn't exacerbate symptoms, because this is an athlete, and the athlete needs to move and feel good about him or herself. But it has to be structured, it has to be overseen, and they can continue to do some sort of conditioning while they're healing. That's really important. Basically, I believe that love your brain, love your sport. You really, really love your sport? Great. Really, really love your brain. Because if you love your brain, you'll take care of it. You'll take care of every single concussion to make sure that it's totally resolved. And in doing so, you will prolong your sports career and your sports activities way into college. I've seen too many kids at age 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 who've sustained 3 concussions already. What does that mean for high school? So I hope that what you get from here today is the importance of rest. Rest, I believe, is best. It's the most effective treatment we have. It's very heuristically simple. It makes sense. But we have to embrace it as a culture, and we have to promote it. Thank you.